The chandeliers at the Pierre Hotel didn't sparkle. They glared. My father, Charles Sterling, stood at the podium, a flute of vintage champagne raised high, looking out at a sea of senators, investors, and defense contractors. He didn't just announce his retirement. He announced my erasure. Effective immediately, the new CEO of Sterling Aerospace would be my brother, Jack. My father called him the only natural heir to the Sterling legacy. I stood there in my Valentino gown, holding a glass of champagne that cost more than my first car, and watched my entire life's work vaporize in a single sentence. But I didn't scream. I just took a sip. Drop a comment, and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The applause was a physical weight, pressing against my eardrums. Beside me, my mother, Cynthia, clapped with the fervent, desperate energy of a woman who believes that if she makes enough noise, she can drown out the truth. She glanced at me, her eyes wide and warning, expecting a scene. She expected tears, a shattered glass, a scream of injustice. That's what a daughter does when she is publicly disinherited in favor of a brother who once asked me how to spell aerodynamics. But I didn't give her a scene. I gave her silence. I took another slow, deliberate sip of champagne, letting the cold liquid settle in my stomach. I learned a long time ago that in the Sterling family, emotion is blood in the water. If you bleed, they feed. So I stopped bleeding. In psychology, they call it the gray rock method. It is a defense strategy used when dealing with narcissists and toxic personalities. You become uninteresting. You become boring. You become a gray rock that no one bothers to kick twice. For the last 18 months, while I was orchestrating the most complex hostile takeover in the history of our industry, I played the role of the gray rock perfectly. I let them interrupt me in meetings. I let them take credit for my financial models. I let them believe I was weak because the moment they think you are weak, they stop watching their backs. My father's voice boomed over the speakers, praising Jack's visionary leadership, a phrase that would be laughable if it weren't so expensive. I looked at Charles Sterling, the man who had taught me everything about business by showing me exactly what kind of leader not to be. I was 12 years old the first time he erased me. I had walked into his study, holding a binder full of sketches for a new turbine design I had spent weeks studying. I wanted to show him I understood drag coefficients. He didn't even look up from his scotch. He just slid the binder off the desk and into the wastebasket. He said, "Aerospace is a man's game, sweetheart. You're here to be the office decoration, not the architect. Leave the thinking to Jack." That was the moment the daughter died, and the strategist was born. I realized then that competence would never be enough to earn my seat at the table. I couldn't just be good. I had to be invisible. While Jack was being groomed for leadership, which mostly involved golf lessons and learning how to bury sexual harassment complaints, I was becoming a ghost. I went to business school. I learned corporate law. I memorized the bylaws of Sterling Aerospace better than the legal team. I became the person who fixed the problems no one else wanted to touch. The person who stayed late, the person who knew where every single body was buried because I was the one holding the shovel. Standing in that ballroom, watching Jack preen like a peacock on stage, I felt a cold, metallic satisfaction. They thought this was a coronation. They thought I was standing here, defeated, sipping my drink in resignation. They didn't understand that silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it is the sound of a weapon loading. My father thought he was handing the kingdom to his son. He didn't realize he had just handed the keys to the executioner. I checked my watch. It was 8:15. In exactly 45 minutes, the gray rock was going to crush them all. The memory of that day in my father's study was the first brick in the wall I built around myself. While Jack spent his 20s finding himself in Ibiza on the company dime, I was building my own empire, brick by painful brick. I didn't go to parties. I didn't take vacations. I went to Wharton on a scholarship I earned by sleeping 4 hours a night. I graduated top of my class, and not a single Sterling was in the audience. My mother sent a text. "Good luck, sweetie. Don't forget to call Jack for his birthday." I didn't call. I was too busy being recruited by the most ruthless investment firm on Wall Street. My first job paid $105,000 a year. It felt like a fortune. It felt like freedom. I lived in a shoebox apartment in Manhattan and ate ramen, saving every penny, investing aggressively. I became an expert in distressed assets. My job was to find companies that were bleeding money, figure out why, and either fix them or strip them for parts. I got very good at spotting rot. And 3 years ago, I spotted the biggest rot of all. I was reviewing acquisition targets for a client when a familiar name popped up on my screen, Sterling Aerospace Dynamics. My heart stopped. I pulled the financials. It was a disaster. Revenue had dropped 42% in 5 years. They were hemorrhaging cash. Their debt-to-equity ratio was a nightmare. The company my grandfather Arthur had built from a single hangar into an aviation giant was being piloted into the ground by my father's ego and my brother's incompetence. I felt a surge of panic, followed immediately by a cold, clarifying rage. This wasn't just a business failing. This was my history being erased. This was the legacy I had been denied, being squandered by the people who claimed it was their birthright. I dug deeper. I spent weeks analyzing the corporate structure, looking for a way in. And then I found it, the secret that changed everything. My grandfather, Arthur Sterling, was a visionary, but he was also paranoid. He didn't trust anyone completely, not even his own son. When he died, he didn't leave the company entirely to my father. He left Charles 31%. The rest? The rest was scattered like seeds in the wind. Shares given to founding engineers, retired mechanics, distant cousins, charitable trusts. My father had been running the company like a dictator, acting like he owned the whole thing, but he didn't. He was a minority shareholder with a very loud voice. That night, sitting in my office at 3 a.m, surrounded by balance sheets and coffee cups, I realized the truth. The company wasn't theirs to give. It never was. My father was just a steward who had forgotten he was a guest. And if the shares were out there, they could be bought. I didn't call my father to warn him. I didn't call Jack to offer help. I called Julian Hayes, the most terrifying corporate litigator in New York. I told him I wanted to buy a company. He asked which one. I told him, the one that forgot I exist. And that's when the architect of survival became the architect of their destruction. Back at the gala, the applause had died down, replaced by the murmurs of guests moving toward the open bar. I hadn't moved. I was still holding my champagne, watching Jack work the room. He was in his element, shaking hands, flashing that practiced, hollow smile that charmed people just enough to make them forget he had never actually built anything in his life. He spotted me and made his way over, not with warmth, but with the swagger of a man who thinks he's won the lottery. "Madeline," he said, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Looking a little glum for a celebration, aren't you?" "Congratulations, Jack," I said, my voice flat. "I didn't know you were even interested in the CEO role. Last I heard, you were more focused on your golf handicap." He laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Someone has to steer the ship, Maddie. Dad's been carrying the weight for too long. And hey, I wanted to tell you, I've got a spot for you in the new administration." He leaned in closer, his cologne cloying and expensive. "VP of Communications. We need a pretty face to handle the press releases, maybe plan the holiday parties. It's perfect for you. Low stress, keeps you in the loop, but leaves the heavy lifting to the big boys." VP of Communications. A glorified secretary. He was offering me a job planning parties at the company I had spent my entire adult life learning how to run. My mother appeared at my other side, sensing tension like a bloodhound. "Now, Madeline," she said, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Don't you dare make a scene. Your brother is just trying to include you. Be happy for him. Smile. You look so much prettier when you smile." I looked at them. Really looked at them. For years, I had been operating under a delusion. I thought that if I worked hard enough, if I was loyal enough, if I sacrificed enough, they would finally see me. I thought my love was an investment that would eventually pay dividends. But standing there, listening to my brother insult my intelligence and my mother police my facial expressions, I realized the truth. In behavioral economics, it's called the sunk cost fallacy. It's the irrational tendency to continue investing in a losing proposition simply because you've already invested so much. You throw good money after bad, hoping to recoup your losses, when the only rational move is to cut and run. My family wasn't a bond to be cherished. They were a bad investment, a failing asset. I had spent 32 years pouring emotional capital into a black hole, hoping for a return that was never coming. I looked at Jack, preening in his tuxedo. I looked at my mother, eyes hard and anxious. And I felt something inside me snap, not with a bang but with a quiet, decisive click. The emotional ledger was closed. The debt was written off. I didn't hate them anymore. I just wanted to liquidate. "You're right, Mom," I said, offering her a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Jack needs all the help he can get. I'm just overwhelmed by the generosity." Jack beamed, missing the sarcasm entirely. "Great. We'll talk details Monday. Go mingle, Maddie. Try to look like you belong here." He patted my cheek and walked away. I watched him go, feeling a strange lightness. He thought he had just bought my compliance with a pity job. He didn't know he had just signed his own termination letter. I turned away and headed toward the stage. It was time to close the deal. The next 18 months were a masterclass in stealth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't file complaints. I went shopping. My first stop was a nursing home in Connecticut. I sat by the bedside of Harold Holloway, the 83-year-old engineer who had designed the original propulsion system for my grandfather's first jet. He held 4.2% of the company's stock, gifted to him in 1987. He hated my father. When I told him Charles was driving the company into the ground, Harold didn't just agree to sell. He thanked me. "Take it back, Maddie," he wheezed, signing the transfer papers with a shaky hand. "Take it all back." That was the first domino. From there, I became a hunter. I tracked down Martha Chun in Kansas, the widow of one of Grandpa's first investors. She owned 3.7% and was living on a fixed income that barely covered her heating bill. I offered her fair market value, cash up front. She cried when she signed. I found Douglas Bennett, a distant cousin who hadn't been invited to a Sterling family Christmas since 1999. He owned 2.1% and laughed when I told him Jack was the new CEO. "That boy thinks a balance sheet is something you sleep on," he said, signing the papers on the hood of his truck. I used shell companies to hide my tracks. Athena Holdings, Vanguard Trust. Names that sounded boring and bureaucratic on the quarterly reports my father never bothered to read. Piece by piece, share by share, I was reassembling my grandfather's legacy. It cost me everything I had. I liquidated my $401,000. I sold my apartment. I leveraged every asset I owned. I was betting my entire life on the belief that I could save something that didn't want to be saved. And then I found the kingmaker, Ray Carter, my grandfather's oldest friend and silent partner. He lived in a cabin in Vermont, surrounded by photos of the glory days. He owned 7.1%. When I walked into his living room, he looked at me and said, "You have Arthur's eyes." I told him my plan. I told him about the debt, the falling revenue, the way Jack treated the employees like servants. Ray listened, nodding slowly. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a yellowed envelope. "Your grandfather gave me this 20 years ago," he said. "He told me to give it to the one who came back for the company." Inside was a letter from Grandpa Arthur. It read, "Ray, if you're reading this, Richard doesn't have the vision, and Jack doesn't have the spine. But Madeline does. If she comes for it, give her the sword." I wept. For the first time in this entire war, I wept. Ray signed the papers. With his 7%, the math tipped. I didn't just have a voice anymore. I had 52.6%. I called Julian Hayes from the car. "It's done," I said, my voice shaking. "I have the majority." "Congratulations, Miss Sterling," Julian replied, his voice smooth as silk. "You just bought yourself a war. Are you ready to win it?" "I'm not just ready," I said, watching the Vermont trees blur past my window. "I'm inevitable." Back in the ballroom, the memory of those months fortified me like armor. I checked my watch again. The speech was ending. My father was raising his glass for a final toast. The room erupted in applause. Jack was beaming, looking like a king who had just been crowned. It was time. I set my champagne glass down on a passing tray. I picked up my black leather portfolio from the chair beside me. It was heavy, filled with the weight of 52.6% of the voting stock. I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking a steady, ominous rhythm on the marble floor. The gray rock was about to speak. The applause died down as I stepped onto the stage. My father frowned, confused by my presence, but before he could signal security, I leaned into the microphone. "Thank you for that inspiring vision of the future, Father," I said, my voice magnified, calm, and terrifyingly steady. "But before we toast to the new CEO, there's a small administrative matter we need to clarify." I unzipped the black leather portfolio. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. I pulled out a single document, a notarized affidavit signed by Julian Hayes and the transfer agent. "Effective as of 4 in the afternoon today," I read, "voting control of Sterling Aerospace has been restructured. The combined shares of the Founders Trust, the employee stock ownership plan, and the private holdings of Mr. Ray Carter have been acquired by a single entity, Athena Holdings." Jack chuckled nervously. "Maddie, what is this? Some kind of prank? This isn't the time." I ignored him. I looked directly at the board of directors sitting in the front row. I am the sole proprietor of Athena Holdings. My current voting stake in Sterling Aerospace is 52.6%, which means, as the majority shareholder, I am exercising my right to veto the appointment of Jack Sterling as CEO. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. My father's face went from confused to purple in 3 seconds. "You can't do that," he sputtered, gripping the podium. "I own this company. I built it." "You inherited 31% of it," I corrected, my voice cutting through his bluster like a laser. "And you have mismanaged it into a 42% revenue loss. You didn't build anything, Dad. You were just the caretaker. And you've been evicted." I pulled out another document. "Here are the transfer certificates. Harold Holloway's 4%. Martha Chen's 3%. Ray Carter's 7%. They didn't sell to a stranger. They sold to me because they remembered who actually did the work while you were playing golf." Jack lunged forward, grabbing the portfolio from my hand. He scanned the pages, his eyes darting frantically. "This is fraud. She stole these. She manipulated them. It's a legal acquisition," I said, taking the portfolio back. "Every signature is notarized. Every transfer is recorded. You can call your lawyers, but they'll just tell you the same thing mine did. You're fired." My mother stood up, her face a mask of horror. "Madeline, stop this. You are embarrassing the family. Apologize to your brother immediately." I looked at her. For 32 years, her voice had been the command I obeyed. Her disapproval had been the cage I lived in. But looking at her now, shrieking in her designer gown, she didn't look scary. She looked small. "I'm not embarrassing the family, Mother," I said. "I'm saving the company. Because what Jack and Dad didn't tell you, what they didn't tell anyone in this room, is how they've been funding their lifestyle for the last 5 years." The room gasped. I had one more card to play. The kill shot. I turned back to the microphone. "It wasn't just incompetence. It was theft. You borrowed against the employee pension fund," I said, my voice projecting clearly to every corner of the ballroom. $3.4 million over the last 5 years to cover your personal losses in speculative real estate deals. You didn't just fail the company. You robbed the people who built it." Pandemonium broke out. Senators were on their phones. Investors were shouting. My father looked like he was having a stroke, but I knew he wasn't. He was just realizing that for the first time in his life, he couldn't charm or bully his way out of the consequences. Jack looked at me, and I saw something I had never seen in his eyes before. Fear. Pure, unadulterated fear. "We were going to pay it back," he whispered, but his voice was lost in the chaos. "That's not how theft works, Jack," I said. "And that's not how leadership works." I turned to the audience. As of this moment, the board has been notified. The authorities have been contacted. The stolen funds will be repatriated from the liquidation of personal assets held by Charles and Jack Sterling. This isn't a hostile takeover. It's a rescue mission. Sterling Aerospace isn't a piggy bank for entitled heirs. It is a responsibility. It is a community of 500 engineers, mechanics, and support staff who deserve a pension when they retire, not an IOU from a bankrupt CEO. Security arrived, not for me, but for them. As they were escorted out, my father blustering about loyalty, my mother weeping about her reputation, Jack silent and pale, I felt a strange, quiet peace settle over me. It wasn't triumph. It was the heavy, grounding weight of duty. In sociology, they call it noblesse oblige, the idea that privilege entails responsibility. Jack thought the crown meant he could do whatever he wanted. I knew the crown meant you serve the people who let you wear it. I walked out of the ballroom and into the cool night air. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. I answered, just for a second. "How could you?" she screamed. "You destroyed us. You ungrateful, hateful." I hung up. Then I blocked the number. I blocked Jack. I blocked my father. I got into the waiting car where Julian Hayes was sitting with a celebratory scotch. "To the victor," he said, raising a glass. "To the architect," I corrected, taking a sip. The next morning, I walked into the CEO's office. My grandfather's office. It smelled like old leather and possibility. I sat in the chair that had been denied to me for 20 years. It fit perfectly. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't sad. I was clean. I picked up the phone and called Harold Holloway in the nursing home. "It's done, Harold," I said. "The pension is safe." "I knew you could do it, Maddie," he whispered. "Your grandfather knew it too." I hung up and looked out at the skyline. They had tried to erase me. They had tried to make me invisible. But they forgot the most important rule of architecture. The foundation determines the height of the structure. They built on ego. I built on competence. And now I was the only one left standing. If you've ever had to build your own table because they wouldn't give you a seat, share the story. You are the architect of your own worth.